For nearly 2,000 years, tens of thousands of people swore an oath of silence, and every single one of them kept it until the day they died. Think about that for a moment. Not one betrayal, not one deathbed confession that survives, not one letter, one diary, one whispered account passed down to a grandchild. From every corner of the ancient Greek world, pilgrims risked long and dangerous journeys across mountains, across seas, along roads haunted by bandits, to take part in a single ritual held in a small town called Eleusis. Emperors knelt beside slaves, philosophers walked beside farmers, poets, generals, merchants, mothers, and kings all stood shoulder to shoulder in the same torchlit darkness, witnessed something extraordinary, and then swore, on pain of death, never to reveal what they had seen. This is the story of Eleusis, the most famous mystery in history, and the one that has never truly been solved. And here is the paradox that should stop you in your tracks. If this was just an ordinary religious ceremony, some incense, some prayers, a procession, and a sacrifice, why would anyone bother to protect it? Ordinary rituals were everywhere in the ancient world. They were described openly, painted on vases, carved into stone, discussed in the marketplace. Nobody died to protect the details of a harvest festival. Yet the Eleusinian Mysteries were guarded with a ferocity we can barely comprehend. The Athenian state made revealing the secret a capital crime. The playwright Aeschylus was nearly killed by an angry crowd, merely on the suspicion that one of his tragedies had hinted at something sacred. The brilliant and reckless Alcibiades was condemned to death in absentia for allegedly mocking the rites at a private party. Whatever happened inside that sanctuary, people believed it was worth killing for and worth dying for. But the deeper mystery, the one that keeps scholars awake at night even now, is not that the rites were secret. It is that the secret worked. The Eleusinian Mysteries were celebrated for close to 2 millennia, longer than Christianity has existed, longer than most empires, longer than almost any continuous institution in human history. Across all those centuries, across all those hundreds of thousands of initiates, the silence held. Rome conquered Greece, and instead of exposing the mysteries, Roman emperors traveled to Eleusis to be initiated themselves. Cicero, one of the most talkative men who ever lived, would say only that Athens had given the world nothing more excellent, and that those who were initiated learned how to live with joy and how to die with better hope. That is all. A hint, a door left open just a crack, and then silence again. 2,000 years of archaeology, excavation, and scholarly speculation later, we have unearthed the sanctuary, mapped the Great Hall, catalogued the inscriptions, and we still do not know, with certainty, what happened on the final night of initiation. It is quite simply history's most successful act of collective silence. Before we walk through those gates together, let me pause for just a moment. If you love ancient wisdom, sacred geometry, Hermetic philosophy, mystical symbols, the study of consciousness, and the timeless teachings of thinkers like Manly P. Hall, subscribe to the channel right now. Every video is carefully researched from trusted historical, philosophical, and esoteric sources, created to help you explore the deep principles that may be quietly shaping the whole of reality. If that journey speaks to something in you, you are exactly where you belong, and this story, perhaps more than any other, is for you. Because here is the heart of the matter, the thesis that will guide everything you are about to hear. The Eleusinian Mysteries were not merely an ancient religious rite. They were not simply a festival, a superstition, or a colorful piece of pagan theater. The evidence fragmentary, whispered, glimpsed between the lines of philosophers and poets, points to something far more profound. Eleusis was one of the most influential spiritual schools in human history. A place where, according to those who went through its gates, ordinary human beings were transformed in a single night. They entered as people like you and me, anxious, grieving, afraid of the darkness that waits for all of us. And they came out, so the ancient voices tell us, no longer afraid to die. Pindar wrote that whoever had seen the mysteries understood the end of life and understood its God-given beginning. Sophocles called the initiated thrice blessed, the only mortals for whom death held life rather than emptiness. Something happened in that hall that changed people at the deepest level. A human being can be changed their relationship with their own mortality. How is that possible? What could anyone see or hear or experience in the span of one night that would dissolve the oldest and most universal fear our species carries? That is the question at the center of this story, and it branches into others we will follow, one by one, through the hours ahead. What actually were the mysteries? Where did they come from? And what did the long path of initiation involve? From the first purifications in the sea to the final revelation in the darkness of the Telesterion. Why did they endure for nearly 2,000 years, surviving wars, plagues, invasions, and the rise and fall of entire civilizations, when so much else of the ancient world crumbled into dust? What changed so profoundly in those who participated? What did Plato mean? What did Cicero mean? What did a Roman emperor kneel in the dust of a small Greek town hoping to receive? And finally, the question that haunts every historian who has ever stood among the ruins of Eleusis at sunset. Why does the secret still hold? Why, with all our science, all our archaeology, all our accumulated cleverness, does the central experience of the mysteries remain one of history's greatest unsolved enigmas?
Pages hold
I will be honest with you from the start. No one alive can answer these questions with absolute certainty.
Waiting for those
the initiates made sure
know
of that.
how to listen.
But that does not mean we are helpless. The silence itself left a shape, the way a missing statue leaves its outline in the dust. We have the myth that the mysteries were built upon a mother's grief, a daughter stolen into the underworld, a world dying of sorrow and reborn through hope. We have the ruins, the inscriptions, the sacred road that pilgrims walked barefoot from Athens. We have the testimony of the greatest minds of antiquity, men who chose their words with exquisite care, saying just enough to tell us that something real happened there, and not one word more. And when we gather all these fragments together and hold them up to the light, a picture begins to emerge, hazy at the edges, but unmistakable at its center of a technology of the soul, refined over centuries, designed to carry a human being to the very border of death and bring them back transformed. But to understand what happened inside that temple, we must first travel back, far back, before Rome, before the golden age of Athens, to a world where the gods were not characters in old books, but living presences in the wind and the wheat, where every spring and every harvest was a conversation with the divine. Back to a world where the greatest question a human being could ask was not how to live, but what waits for us when living ends. And back to a small town, just 14 miles from Athens, sitting quietly by the sea, a town that, for 2,000 years, held what the ancient world believed was nothing less than the key to eternity. Imagine, for a moment, that you have opened your eyes in that world. The sun is rising over the Aegean, and the light that spills across the hills is not simply light, it is the presence of a god. The thunder that rolled through the mountains last night was not weather, it was a voice. The olive trees on the hillside are not merely crops. They are a gift, given by a goddess to a city that bears her name. In this world, you do not believe in the gods the way we believe in ideas. You live among them. They are woven into the smell of rain on dry earth, into the swelling of grain in the fields, into the fever that takes a child and the mercy that spares one. Every meal begins with an offering. Every voyage begins with a prayer. And every spring, when the first green shoots break through the winter soil, an entire civilization exhales because life once again has been given back. This is ancient Greece. And to understand the Eleusinian Mysteries, you must first feel what it meant to breathe its air.
The omens
Here,
are favorable.
the temple is not a place
The
you visit
gods
once a
accept
week. It is the
our
beating
offering.
heart of the community, a treasury,
Hail
a
to
gathering
the
place,
Olympians.
a repository of memory and law and story. The great festivals mark the turning of the year the way our calendars mark months. Religion is not a compartment of life. It is the water the whole society swims in. And at the center of this world, in its golden age, stands Athens, a city unlike anything humanity had yet produced. Picture it in the 5th century before the Common Era. On the high rock of the Acropolis, the Parthenon is rising, its marble columns catching the morning sun, a temple so perfectly proportioned that architects still study its secrets today. Below, in the agora, the marketplace hums with life. Merchants calling out prices for wine and pottery, ships' captains trading news from Egypt and the Black Sea, and pacing among them men asking dangerous questions. Socrates walks these streets, stopping strangers to ask what justice is, what virtue is, what the soul is. In the theaters carved into the hillsides, Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides are staging tragedies that will still make audiences weep 2,500 years later. Democracy itself, flawed, fragile, revolutionary, is being invented here, argued into existence by citizens gathered on a hillside. This is a civilization at the height of its powers, connected by trade routes and shared myths to a vast Mediterranean world, from the colonies of Sicily and southern Italy to the coast of Asia Minor. Greek is becoming the language of commerce, of philosophy, of poetry, and Greek stories of Zeus and Athena, of Achilles and Odysseus, are becoming the shared imagination of millions of people who will never meet. But now, leave the noise of Athens behind, walk out through the city's western gate, and follow the road as it winds northwest along the coast. The crowds thin, the air fills with salt and pine. After 14 miles, a long day's walk, you arrive at a modest town, sitting on a fertile plain beside a sheltered bay. The Thriasian plain stretches around it, golden with wheat and barley, some of the richest farmland in all of Attica. The town is called Eleusis, and by the standards of Athens, it is nothing remarkable until you see the sanctuary. For here, rising against the low hillside, stands the great sanctuary of Demeter, goddess of the grain, goddess of the harvest, the divine mother who feeds the world. And this place is old in a way that even the ancient Greeks found awe-inspiring. When archaeologists excavated the site in the modern era, they found layer upon layer of sacred building, going down and down through the centuries until they reached foundations from the Mycenaean age, possibly as early as the 15th century, before the Common Era. Think about what that means. When Socrates was alive, this sanctuary was already 1,000 years old. Worship at Eleusis stretched back before Homer, before the Trojan War of legend, back into the bronze-lit dawn of Greek civilization itself. It is one of the longest continuously used sacred sites in the entire Western world. A place where, for perhaps 2,000 years without interruption, human beings came seeking the same thing, and they came by a road that was itself holy. The sacred way, the Hierahodos, ran those 14 miles from the heart of Athens to the gates of the sanctuary. And it was no ordinary road. It was lined with shrines and altars, with the tombs of the honored dead, with sacred fig trees and wayside monuments, each one a station in an unfolding story. To walk it was to move through a landscape saturated with meaning past the spot where, it was said, the goddess herself once rested in her grief, across the bridge where masked figures would one day hurl ritual insults at passing pilgrims, humbling the proud before they approached the divine. Remember this road. Hold it in your mind. Because one day, in the heart of this story, we will walk it together, in a torchlit procession of thousands, moving through the darkness toward the sea. Yet to truly understand why so many made that journey, you must understand one more thing about this radiant world, its shadow. For all its beauty, for all its philosophy and marble and light, the Greek world lived under a quiet, crushing sorrow. Ask an ordinary Greek what awaited them after death, and the answer, drawn from Homer, was bleak beyond telling. The dead, the poets said, went down to the house of Hades not to punishment, not to reward, but to a gray, whispering half-existence. Shades without strength, without memory, without joy, fluttering like bats in the darkness. When Odysseus visits the underworld in the Odyssey, He meets the ghost of the great Achilles, the mightiest hero of his age, and Achilles tells him, in one of the most devastating lines in all of ancient literature, that he would rather be a poor farmhand, alive and breathing on the earth, than rule as a king over all the lifeless dead. That was the horizon of hope for the ordinary person, an eternity of gray, no reunion with loved ones, no light, no meaning, just the slow fading of everything you ever were. And it is against that darkness that Eleusis blazed like a lamp in the night. Because Eleusis promised something no temple, no philosopher, no city could offer. It promised that death was not the end, that for those who had seen what was shown in the sanctuary, the afterlife would not be gray but bright, that, as the ancient hymn declared, "Blessed is the one among mortals who has beheld these things, for the uninitiated will never have such a portion in the darkness below." Hope, real, trembling, transformative hope held out to anyone, rich or poor, male or female, citizen or slave, who spoke Greek and came with clean hands. In a world resigned to shadow, that promise was not merely comfort, it was revolutionary. And it is the soil, the tension between despair and hope, between the gray house of Hades and the golden fields of Demeter, from which the mysteries grew. But hope like that does not come from nowhere. At the root of it lay a story, one of the oldest and most powerful stories the Greek world ever told. A story of a mother's grief so vast, so absolute, that it nearly ended the world. A story of a daughter dragged into darkness, of a goddess who defied Olympus itself, and of a bargain that gave humanity the seasons and something more. To understand Eleusis, we must first hear the myth that gave it birth. It begins in a meadow. Picture it. A spring morning somewhere at the edge of the world, the grass heavy with dew, the air thick with the scent of crocus and hyacinth. A young goddess, Persephone, daughter of Demeter, wanders among her companions, gathering flowers into the folds of her dress. She is laughter and light, the very image of everything young and unbroken. And then she sees it, a narcissus impossibly beautiful, 100 blossoms on a single stem, glowing as if the earth itself had grown it as a lure, because it had. The moment her fingers close around the flower, the ground tears open, not a tremor, not a crack, a chasm yawning wide beneath her feet, and out of that darkness comes thunder. Black horses, a golden chariot, and a figure crowned in shadow. Hades, lord of the dead, ruler of everything beneath the world, seizes the girl and pulls her down. She screams. The ancient hymn tells us she cried out to her father Zeus, to anyone who might hear. But the meadow is far from Olympus. The earth closes over her like water over a stone, and then silence. Only trampled grass, scattered flowers, and a stillness so complete it feels like the world itself is holding its breath. Far away, Demeter hears the echo of that scream. And something in her, the goddess of grain, the gentle mother of the harvest, breaks. For 9 days and 9 nights she wanders the earth, a torch blazing in each hand, refusing food, refusing sleep, refusing even to bathe. She asks the mountains, she asks the sea. No one will tell her the truth, because the truth is unbearable, that Zeus himself had quietly consented to the abduction, giving his own daughter to his brother of the underworld like a piece of property. When Demeter finally learns this from Helios, the all-seeing sun, who alone had witnessed the crime, her grief curdles into something colder. She turns her back on Olympus. She strips away her divine radiance, disguises herself as an old mortal woman, and walks the roads of the earth alone, a goddess in mourning, invisible among the people who owe her their daily bread. And her wandering brings her where else? To Eleusis. There, by a well at the edge of town, the daughters of King Helios find what appears to be a weathered old woman, grieving and far from home. They take pity on her. They bring her into the royal household, where the queen, Metaneira, offers her a place as nurse to the family's infant son, a boy named Demophon. It is one of the most tender scenes in all of Greek myth, the goddess who has lost a child, cradling someone else's. And here the story takes a strange, breathtaking turn. Demeter, moved by love and perhaps by defiance, decides to give this mortal child the one gift no mortal has. She will make him deathless. By day she anoints him with ambrosia. By night in secret she lays him in the heart of the fire, burning away his mortality piece by piece, the way a smith refines gold. But one night Metaneira awakes, sees her baby in the flames and screams, and in that scream the spell shatters. Demeter pulls the child from the fire alive, unharmed, but mortal forever now, and her disguise falls away like a cloak. Suddenly the room is filled with light and the fragrance of heaven, and the old nurse stands revealed as a goddess, terrible and beautiful. "Foolish humans," she says, "you do not know when fate brings you good or ill." She commands the people of Eleusis to build her a great temple on the hill above the well, and when it is finished, she withdraws inside it, closes the doors, and gives herself entirely to her grief. And that is when the world begins to die. Because Demeter is not merely a goddess who loves the harvest. She is the harvest, and in her sorrow she withholds her gift. The seed goes into the ground and does not rise. The plow cuts furrows that stay empty. Month after month, the fields turn gray and barren, and famine spreads across the earth like a shadow. Humanity, all of it, stands at the edge of extinction. And here the myth reveals something remarkable. The gods themselves grow desperate, not out of compassion, but out of hunger of their own kind. For if humanity perishes, who will offer sacrifice? The smoke that rose from 10,000 altars, the honor and worship the immortals feed upon, ceases to climb into the sky. One grieving mother, sitting in a darkened temple in a small town near Athens, has brought both earth and heaven to their knees. Zeus sends messenger after messenger, gods bearing gifts and promises. Demeter refuses them all. Her terms are simple and absolute. She will not let one green thing grow until she sees her daughter's face again. And at last the king of the gods yields. He sends Hermes down into the gray country of the dead, into the halls of Hades, with a command: release the girl. And Hades, this is the detail that Chills agrees almost graciously. He tells Persephone she may go, but before she leaves, he offers her something small. A few seeds of a pomegranate, red as blood, sweet on the tongue, and she eats them, whether from hunger or trickery, or, as some ancient whispers, suggest something more willing. The hymn does not fully say, but the law of the underworld is older than the gods themselves. Whoever tastes the food of the dead belongs, in part, to the dead. So when mother and daughter finally embrace, and the hymn tells us they rush to each other like a heart returning to a body. Demeter asks one trembling question: "Did you eat anything down there?" And the answer changes the shape of the world forever. Persephone cannot stay. A compromise is struck, sealed by Zeus himself. For part of each year, she will descend again into the darkness to reign as queen beside Hades. For the rest, she will rise and walk in the light beside her mother. And in that bargain, the Greeks heard the deepest rhythm of existence. When Persephone descends, Demeter mourns, and the earth turns cold and bare. Winter is a mother's grief made visible. When Persephone returns, the goddess's joy breaks over the land like sunrise, and the fields go green again. Spring is a reunion. Every seed buried in the soil is the girl going down into darkness. Every shoot breaking through the earth is the girl coming home. Death and rebirth, loss and return, woven into the very turning of the year. But the myth does not end with the seasons, and this is the part that matters most for our story. The Homeric hymn to Demeter tells us that before the goddess left Eleusis, before she restored the harvest and returned to Olympus, she did one final thing. She summoned the princes of the town Kelios, Triptolemos, Eumolpos, and the others, and she taught them, with her own voice, her sacred rites. Awful mysteries, the hymn calls them, which no one may transgress or utter or ask about, for a great reverence of the gods seals the tongue. Stop and feel the weight of that. The Greeks did not believe the Eleusinian Mysteries were invented by priests or dreamed up by poets. They believed the rites were given, handed down directly by a goddess who had herself walked through loss, who had tasted despair, who had watched her child vanish into darkness, and then watched her rise again. The mysteries were not a human theory about death. They were understood as a divine answer to it, taught by the one being in the cosmos who had lived the whole story from the inside. And encoded in that story was a single, luminous promise, the promise every initiate would one day carry home from Eleusis. What descends into darkness can rise again. The seed is not destroyed by burial. The daughter is not erased by the underworld. Grief is not the end of the road, it is the middle of it. For nearly 2,000 years, that promise pulled pilgrims down the sacred way. But every great story needs an adversary, and the true enemy in this tale was never Hades. It was something far older and far closer to each of us. Because the true enemy of this story does not sit on a throne in the underworld. It does not carry a scepter or command an army. The true enemy lives in the space between your heartbeats, in the quiet hours of the night when the mind wanders where it does not want to go. The enemy is the fear of death itself, the cold, ancient terror of annihilation that has haunted human beings since the first of us buried the first of our dead and stood over the grave wondering. And to understand how heavily that fear pressed on the Greek soul, you need to understand what the Greeks believed was waiting for them. Forget every gentle image of an afterlife you may carry. The underworld of Homer was not a place of punishment, and it was not a place of reward. It was something arguably worse, a place of nothing, a gray, whispering realm where the dead drifted like smoke, stripped of strength, stripped of memory, stripped of everything that had made them who they were. In the Odyssey, when Odysseus descends to the land of the dead, he meets the shade of Achilles, the greatest warrior who ever lived, the hero who chose a short life of glory over a long life of obscurity. And Odysseus, trying to comfort him, says, "Surely you rule here, surely you are a prince among the dead." And Achilles gives him an answer that echoed through Greek culture, like a wound that would not close. "Do not speak soothingly to me of death," he says. "I would rather be a hired laborer on earth, serving a poor man with barely enough to live on than be king over all the perished dead." Let that sink in for a moment. The most glorious of all heroes, the man every Greek boy was raised to admire, looks at eternity and says he would trade all of it, every honor, every song, every ounce of fame for one more ordinary day in the sunlight. That was the horizon the ancient Greek lived beneath. Not hellfire, not judgment, just fading, just the slow dissolving of everything you are into shadow. And every man and woman who walked the roads of Attica, who harvested the grain, who kissed their children goodnight, carried that verdict somewhere inside them. But fear was only the first enemy. The second was quieter, and in some ways crueler. Ignorance. Because the Greeks did not lack ideas about death, they lacked knowledge. They stood, as we still stand, at the absolute boundary of what human perception can reach. The philosophers could argue about the soul, and they did brilliantly. The poets could console, and they did beautifully. But no argument, however elegant, and no poem, however moving, could actually show a person what lies on the other side of the final breath. Reason could build a bridge halfway across the abyss, and no further. And this is precisely where the mysteries made their staggering claim. They did not offer another theory. They did not offer another poem. They offered, or so the initiates believed, an experience, a direct encounter with the truth of death and what follows it, delivered not to the arguing mind, but to the trembling, living soul. Where philosophy said perhaps, Eleusis whispered, "Come and see." And what the pilgrims saw they never told. Which brings us to the third great adversary of this story, one the sanctuary itself created and fiercely defended: silence. The vow of secrecy at Eleusis was not a polite custom. It was not a gentleman's agreement. It was sacred law, and in Athens, breaking it was punishable by death. We are not speculating here. History shows us exactly how seriously this was enforced. Consider Aeschylus, the father of Greek tragedy, a veteran of Marathon, one of the most honored men of his age. According to ancient accounts, he was accused of revealing elements of the mysteries in one of his plays, and an audience turned on him with such fury that he fled for his life to the altar of Dionysus. He was tried for impiety, and tradition says he escaped condemnation only by proving he had never actually been initiated, that whatever resemblance his verses bore to the rites was accident, not betrayal. One of the greatest artists in human history, nearly destroyed by the suspicion of having spoken a few forbidden words. Or consider Alcibiades, the golden boy of Athens, brilliant, beautiful, beloved, the protégé of Socrates himself. On the eve of the great expedition to Sicily, he was accused of profaning the mysteries, of parodying the sacred rites at a private drinking party, playing the role of the high priest for the amusement of his friends. Athens did not laugh. The city condemned him to death in absentia, confiscated his property, and ordered its priests to formally curse his name. A man who might have ruled the Greek world was broken, in part on the rock of Eleusinian silence. This is how completely the vow held. Across nearly 2,000 years, across tens of thousands of initiates, farmers and philosophers, slaves and emperors, no one ever wrote down the heart of the secret. Think about how astonishing that is. Humans are terrible at keeping secrets. We leak, we gossip, we confess. And yet this one secret, held by more people than the population of many ancient cities, went to the grave with every single one of them. But there was one more enemy waiting, patient and pitiless, and it would prove the most dangerous of all. Time itself, because silence so faithfully kept carried a hidden cost. A secret that lives only in living memory dies when memory dies. As the centuries turned, the world that had cradled Eleusis began to crumble. The old gods lost their worshippers. The Roman Empire, that had protected the sanctuary, whose own emperors had walked the sacred way as humble initiates, fractured and fell. New faiths rose, and the ancient temples were closed by decree. And near the end of the 4th century, the sanctuary of Eleusis itself was left in ruins, its fires extinguished after roughly 2 millennia of continuous flame. The last hierophants died, and with them, the unwritten heart of the rite. The mysteries had promised to defeat death, and in a bitter irony, they could not defeat oblivion. The secret was not exposed. It was simply, silently, lost. So this is the true shape of our story's conflict. Not a war of armies, but a war fought on 4 fronts, against the terror of annihilation, against the darkness of not knowing, behind a wall of sworn silence, and under the slow siege of forgetting. And here is what makes it timeless. The decisive battlefield was never the temple, never the courtroom, never the empire. It was the interior of a single human heart. Every pilgrim who set out on that dusty road was marching toward the one confrontation none of us can delegate or postpone. A human being turning, at last, to face the fear of their own ending, eye to eye, in the dark. That is why the mysteries were open to anyone who spoke Greek and had not shed innocent blood, man or woman, free or enslaved, rich or poor. Because death holds no rank, the fear is universal, and so the medicine had to be universal too. And that is why, 20 centuries after the last fire went out, this story still reaches us. The enemy the initiates faced is the same enemy waiting for you and me. So what actually happened when a pilgrim decided to face that fear, to stop running from it, and walk directly toward it? To find out, we must join them ourselves. On the road to Eleusis, in the autumn of the sacred year, when the whole of Athens stirred and the ancient call rang out once more. But the journey did not begin in autumn. It began months earlier, in the gentle warmth of spring, on the banks of a small river called the Ilissos, just outside the walls of Athens. There, in a district known as Agrai, the candidates gathered for what the Greeks called the lesser mysteries, the first threshold, the first gate. Here they received instruction. Here they underwent the preliminary purifications, washing in the river's waters, learning the sacred stories, preparing their hearts for what was to come. And here we find something quietly astonishing, something almost revolutionary for the ancient world. Nearly anyone could stand on those riverbanks, men and women, citizens and foreigners, the wealthy merchant and the household slave, side by side, equal before the goddess. In a civilization built on rigid hierarchies, where women could not vote, where slaves were property, where foreigners were forever outsiders, the mysteries opened their arms to all. Only two things were required: that you could understand Greek, so the sacred words would not be lost on you, and that your hands were clean of innocent blood. That was all. Death makes no distinctions, and neither did Eleusis. Before Demeter, every human soul stood naked and equal. Then came the waiting. Spring turned to summer, summer began to fade, and at last the sacred month of Bodromion arrived, our September, when the light softens and the year itself seems to lean toward its own ending. In Athens, the heralds went out. The proclamation rang through the streets, calling the initiates to gather, warning away the impure and those who could not understand the tongue of the rites. The sacred objects, the hiera hidden in sealed baskets, seen by no uninitiated eye, had already been carried from Eleusis to Athens by the priestesses, escorted like royalty, awaited like the arrival of a god. And then, on one unforgettable day, a single cry echoed through the city. Halad mistai, to the sea, initiates. And imagine it, thousands of people streaming out of Athens toward the shore, each one carrying a small piglet, an animal sacred to Demeter. They waded into the cold salt water, bathing themselves and their offering together, letting the sea, which the Greeks believed could wash away every stain, dissolve the residue of their ordinary lives. The piglets were later sacrificed, their blood standing in for the initiate's own, a symbolic death paid in advance. Step by step, day by day, the old self was being shed like a worn garment. There were days of sacrifice, days of rest and inward stillness, days of fasting, when the body grew light and the mind grew strange and open. Everything ordinary was being stripped away, deliberately, tenderly, one layer at a time, because you cannot carry your everyday self into the presence of the sacred. Something has to be left behind. And then came the day of the great walk. The 19th of Bodromion, dawn over Athens and the roads already alive with bodies. Thousands upon thousands some years, perhaps as many as 30,000 souls gathered to walk the sacred way. The ancient road stretching 14 miles from Athens to Eleusis. At the head of the procession they carried the statue of Iacchos, the torch-bearing youth, the divine child of the mysteries, garlanded in myrtle. Behind him came the priestesses bearing the hiera in their sealed baskets, and behind them, the river of humanity. The initiates crowned with myrtle wreaths, carrying bundled branches, their voices rising together in a rhythmic, ecstatic cry. Yuck! Yuck! A shout that was half hymn, half heartbeat, rolling down the road like thunder made of human breath. The walk took the entire day. The sun climbed and blazed and began to fall. Feet blistered, throats grew hoarse, and somewhere along the route, at a narrow bridge over the river Kephisos, something strange happened. Something the Greeks called the Gephyrismos, the bridge jesting. Masked figures waited there, and as the pilgrims crossed, these figures hurled mockery and obscene insults at them. Even the proudest aristocrat, even the general, even the philosopher was jeered at like a fool. Why? Because pride cannot pass through the gates of Eleusis. Before the mystery of death, your titles mean nothing. Your reputation means nothing. Your carefully constructed self means nothing. The laughter at the bridge stripped away the last of you. Crossed that river, humbled, emptied, and lighter than you had ever been. By the time the procession reached Eleusis, night had fallen. Torches flared to life against the darkness, thousands of flames, moving like a river of stars along the coast, and the initiates, exhausted, footsore, hungry, entered a night of dancing by the well where, in the myth, grieving Demeter herself had once sat as a stranger. They were no longer merely remembering her story. They were living it, step for step, sorrow for sorrow. For they too were fasting now, just as the goddess fasted when she wandered the earth, searching for her stolen daughter, refusing all food, all comfort, all consolation. And just as Demeter finally broke her fast, so did they with a single, sacred drink. The kykeon, a humble mixture of barley, water, and pennyroyal mint, drunk from a special vessel after the long emptiness of fasting. On the surface, nothing could be simpler. Grain and water, the very gifts of Demeter herself. And yet, for centuries now, scholars have paused over this cup and wondered. Some researchers have proposed that the barley used in the kykeon might have carried ergot, a fungus that grows on grain and contains compounds chemically related to powerful psychoactive substances. Could the visions of Eleusis, they ask, have been aided by chemistry, a carefully prepared sacrament that opened the doors of perception? It is a fascinating theory, and we should be honest with each other about it. It remains exactly that, a theory, unproven, debated and doubted by many serious scholars, who point out that fasting, exhaustion, darkness, ritual, and profound expectation are themselves enough to alter human consciousness dramatically. We simply do not know what was in that cup, and perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of the mystery's enduring power. What we do know is this: whoever drank it believed they were drinking what a goddess drank, in the depths of her grief, at the turning point of her story. And now at last the final night arrives. The initiates, purified, humbled, fasted, and filled with the sacred drink, pass through the gates of the sanctuary itself, walls that no uninitiated person may cross on pain of death. Torchlight dances on ancient stone. Ahead of them, looming in the darkness, stands the telesterion, the great hall of initiation, unlike any other temple in Greece. Greek temples were built to house a god, admired from outside, but the telesterion was built to hold people, thousands of them at once, gathered inside, within a forest of columns, on tiers of steps carved into living rock. This building existed for one purpose only: for human beings to see something. And at its center, hidden within the vast hall like a heart within a body, stood a small chamber called the Anaktoron, the Holy of Holies, which only the high priest, the Hierophant, the one who shows the sacred things, could ever enter. The initiates file in, thousands of breaths in the darkness. Somewhere the sealed baskets wait. Somewhere the Hierophant prepares. Every mile walked, every insult endured, every hour of hunger, it has all led to this room, this night, this trembling threshold between everything they were and everything they are about to become. The doors close. The torches are extinguished. And here, at the very center of the ancient world's greatest secret, our certainty ends, and the mystery truly begins. So what happened next? What actually took place in that darkness, on that night, before those thousands of waiting eyes? Here is the honest truth. We do not know. No initiate ever fully broke the oath. In 2,000 years of the rite, across tens of thousands of witnesses, the silence held. And yet we are not entirely blind. Scattered across the wreckage of ancient literature are fragments, whispers, half-slips of the tongue from philosophers who had been inside and could not quite stop themselves from gesturing toward what they had seen. And when we gather those fragments together, patiently, like an archaeologist reassembling a shattered vase, a shape begins to emerge from the dark. The ancients themselves tell us the ritual had 3 parts. There were legomena, things said, deichnomena, things shown, and dromena, things done. Words, visions, and actions woven together into a single, overwhelming night. And most scholars now believe that what unfolded in the telesterion was, at its heart, a sacred drama, the story the initiates already knew, the story of Demeter and Persephone, no longer told to them, but happening around them, happening to them. Imagine it. You stand in absolute blackness, packed among thousands of strangers, after 9 days of fasting, walking, and grief, the kykeon warm in your empty stomach. Somewhere in the dark, a voice begins to cry out, a mother's voice, searching for her stolen daughter. Perhaps you wander, as Demeter wandered. Perhaps you are made to feel the descent itself, the going down, the underworld closing over your head. Ancient hints speak of terrors in that darkness, sudden sounds, the crash of a great gong like the thunder of the world splitting open, apparitions half seen, the panic of losing every bearing you have. This was not theater watched from a safe seat. This was fear, real fear, administered with deliberate care, because the priests of Eleusis seemed to understand something profound. That no one can be reborn who has not first in some way died, and then light. Every account that dares to gesture at this moment agrees on one thing. Out of the deepest darkness came a sudden, blazing, overwhelming light. The great doors of the Anacteron thrown open, fire leaping toward the roof of the Telesterion, so bright, some sources say, that it could be seen far beyond the sanctuary walls. And in that fire stood the Hierophant, the one who shows the holy things. Lifting the Hiera at last, the sacred objects carried in sealed baskets all the way from Eleusis to Athens and back, hidden from every profane eye for centuries. What were they? One late source, a Christian writer, hostile, writing to expose the pagan rites, claims that the supreme revelation of Eleusis, the final secret shown at the climax of the greatest mystery of the ancient world, was this: an ear of grain, a single ear of wheat, harvested and displayed in perfect silence. We cannot verify it, but sit with the possibility for a moment. After the fasting, the terror, the darkness, and the fire, the holiest thing was, perhaps the humblest thing on earth, grain, the thing that dies in the dark soil and rises again. The whole mystery of existence, held up without a single word because no word could carry it. And we possess one testimony that lets us feel, from the inside, what that night did to a human soul. The philosopher Plutarch, himself an initiate, wrote in a surviving fragment that the experience of dying is exactly like the experience of initiation. First, he says, there are wanderings, exhausting circuits in the darkness, journeys that seem to have no end. Then terrors, shuddering, trembling, sweat and amazement. And then, at the moment when all seems lost, a wonderful light comes to meet you. You pass into pure meadows, where there are voices and dances, and the majesty of holy sounds, and there the perfected soul walks free, crowned, among the blessed. Read that again, and understand what it means. Initiation at Eleusis was deliberately structured as a rehearsal of death. The initiates did not merely hear that the soul survives. They were taken through dying, through the fear, the darkness, the dissolution, and out the other side, into light while still alive. They came back from a place most human beings only visit once, and this is why the testimony of those who returned rings with such strange, unshakable certainty. Pindar, the great poet, wrote, "Blessed is the one who has seen these things before going beneath the earth, for he knows the end of life, and he knows its God-given beginning." Sophocles said that for the initiated alone there is life in the world below, while for all others there is only suffering. And Cicero, the sober Roman statesman, no mystic, no dreamer, declared that in the mysteries we have been given a reason not only to live with joy, but to die with a better hope. Listen to what these voices are actually saying. Not we were entertained, not we believe a doctrine. They are saying, we know, something happened to us in that hall, and we no longer fear what every human being fears. Across 5 centuries, from different cities and different temperaments, the report is the same. It is the strongest evidence we possess that whatever occurred at Eleusis, it was real in its effects, real in the lives it altered. And here, at last, we arrive at the heart of it, the turn this entire story has been leading toward. For centuries, seekers and scholars have hunted the secret of Eleusis as if it were a thing, a hidden object, a lost doctrine, a sentence that could be written down and finally read. But what if the deepest secret was never a thing at all? What if the reason no initiate ever revealed it is not only that they swore an oath, but that it could not be revealed, because it did not live in words? What mattered was not what the initiate saw. What mattered was what they became. The darkness, the fasting, the drama, the fire, the silent grain, all of it was an instrument, a precise and ancient technology, refined over centuries, for doing one thing: transforming a human being's relationship with death. You walked into the Telesterion as someone who was going to die. You walked out as someone who had already died and found, on the far side of that dying, not annihilation but light. The Greeks even had a name for the summit of this experience. Those who returned in a later year for the final and highest grade of initiation were called the epoptai, those who have beheld. Not those who learned, not those who believed, those who saw, because Eleusis never asked for faith. It offered something far more dangerous and far more precious, direct experience. And no one captured this more perfectly than Aristotle, who wrote in a fragment that may be the truest sentence ever recorded about the mysteries, that the initiates were not meant to learn anything. They were meant to suffer, to undergo, to experience, and to be changed. Not instruction, but transformation. Not knowledge poured into the mind, but a fire passed through the soul. And when those transformed pilgrims stepped out of the telesterion into the dawn and walked back down the sacred way toward their ordinary lives, they carried something invisible with them, something no basket could hold and no oath needed to protect. And that invisible cargo, passed silently from soul to soul, would go on to shape the greatest minds of the Western world for the next 2,000 years. Consider Plato. When he described the soul's journey toward truth, the prisoner in the cave, turning painfully toward the light, the ascent from shadows to blazing reality, the vision of beauty itself that leaves the beholder forever altered, he was not inventing a new language. He was borrowing one, the language of Eleusis. Scholars have long noticed that Plato's most sacred passages are saturated with the vocabulary of the mysteries. The darkness before revelation, the sudden blaze of light, the vision that cannot be spoken but only seen. In the Phaedrus, he describes souls beholding blessed sights in a state of perfect initiation. It is hard to read those words and not hear the echo of the telesterion. Whether or not Plato himself walked the sacred way, and many believe he did, the shape of his philosophy is the shape of the initiation, descent, purification, revelation, return. And centuries later, when Rome had conquered Greece, but Greece had quietly conquered Rome, the great statesman Cicero, a man who had seen empires rise and republics fall, a man not easily impressed, wrote something extraordinary. Of all the gifts Athens had given the world, he said, and remember, this is the city of democracy, of philosophy, of drama, of mathematics. Nothing was more excellent than the mysteries. They had tamed humanity, he wrote, civilized us, given us the beginnings of true life. And then came the sentence that has haunted readers ever since. The mysteries taught us not only how to live with joy, but how to die with a better hope. To live with joy, to die with hope. From a Roman skeptic, a lawyer, a man of the world, this was not flattery. This was testimony. The emperors came too. Hadrian, the restless philosopher-traveler who ruled the known world, made the pilgrimage to Eleusis and knelt in the darkness like any farmer's son. And Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, who wrote his private meditations by lamplight in military camps along the Danube, a man who spent his life staring unflinchingly at death, he too sought initiation. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful man on earth, a man who could command anything, traveled to a small town in Greece to receive something his power could not purchase and his philosophy could not provide. When barbarian raiders damaged the sanctuary, it was Marcus who rebuilt it. Whatever he saw there, he protected it. And when the classical world began to fade, the vision of Eleusis did not die, it went inward. The Neoplatonists, Plotinus, Iamblichus, Proclus built entire architectures of the cosmos around a single movement. The soul's descent into matter and its long, luminous climb back toward the One. Plotinus described the ultimate union with the divine in words that could have been spoken on the steps of the telesterion, a seeing beyond seeing, a touching beyond thought. Iamblichus taught that ritual itself, sacred action, could accomplish what reason never could. These men had inherited, and were now philosophizing, the very pattern Eleusis had enacted in darkness and fire for 1,000 years. And alongside them flowed other rivers carrying the same water, the Hermetic writings with their doctrine of rebirth through divine knowledge, and the Gnostic movements, with their story of a soul trapped in darkness, awakening, remembering its origin and climbing home. Different names, different gods, different centuries, the same journey. And then there is the most delicate thread of all, the relationship between Eleusis and the young faith that would inherit the Mediterranean world. Christianity. Listen to the imagery. A grain of wheat that must fall into the earth and die in order to live. A sacred meal that binds the faithful together. Rebirth through initiation. A death that is not an ending but a doorway. The blessed hope of life beyond the grave. When the Apostle Paul wrote that unless a grain of wheat dies, it remains alone, but if it dies, it bears much fruit, he was speaking in Greek to Greek audiences. In a world where everyone knew what happened at Eleusis, even if no one could say it aloud. Now, we must be careful here, and honest. Scholars have debated for over a century whether Christianity borrowed from the mysteries, or whether both traditions drew independently from the same deep well of human intuition, the well of seed and harvest, of death and return. The truth is likely tangled beyond untangling, but this much is certain. The two traditions recognized each other, and perhaps that is why the confrontation, when it came, was so absolute, because the end, when it arrived, was swift and merciless. The Christian emperors of the 4th century closed the pagan temples one by one. Theodosius banned the ancient rites, and then, around the year 396, the Gothic king Alaric swept through Greece with his armies accompanied, some sources say, by monks who saw the destruction of pagan sanctuaries as holy work. The sanctuary of Eleusis, which had survived Persian invasion and Roman conquest, which had opened its doors every autumn for nearly 2,000 years, was burned and broken. The Telesterion, the Hall of Visions, was left in ruins. The last Hierophant reportedly foresaw the end, prophesying that the temple would fall and the mysteries would cease, and they did. After 18 centuries of unbroken practice, the longest continuously celebrated religious rite in the history of the Western world, the fires of Eleusis went out, and the silence that had protected the secret became simply silence. But here is the strange thing about Eleusis. It refuses to stay buried. 15 centuries later, in the consulting rooms of 20th century Europe, Carl Jung looked at the ancient myth and saw something astonishing, not a dead religion, but a living map of the human psyche. The descent of Persephone into the underworld, he suggested, is the descent every soul must make into its own unconscious, into the buried grief, the unlived life, the darkness we spend our days avoiding. Demeter's desperate search is the conscious mind seeking what it has lost. And the return, the rebirth, the reunion, the flowering of the barren earth, is what Jung called individuation. The emergence of a deeper, truer self on the other side of the dark. For Jung, the initiates of Eleusis had ritualized a psychological truth that modern humanity had forgotten and desperately needed to remember, that transformation requires descent, that you cannot be reborn without first in some way dying. And once you see this pattern, you cannot unsee it. It runs through modern literature's endless journeys into the underworld, through cinema's heroes, who must fall into darkness before they rise, through every story where someone loses everything and returns changed. The descent and return of Eleusis has become the invisible grammar of how we tell stories about becoming human. And beyond the stories, quieter echoes persist. Researchers studying near-death experiences record testimonies eerily similar to the initiates' claims, the loss of the fear of death after a single overwhelming vision. Contemplatives in meditation speak of dissolving and returning, and in modern clinical trials, patients facing terminal illness who undergo carefully guided profound experiences report, in words almost identical to those spoken 24 centuries ago, that death no longer seems to them an evil. The temple fell, the fires went out, but the human need that Eleusis answered, the need to stand before death and not be destroyed by it, that need never went anywhere. It is in this room with you now, which brings us to the final question, the one scholars have circled for centuries. Why, after all this time, can we still not unlock the secret of Eleusis? Perhaps the answer is stranger than we imagined. Perhaps the answer is stranger than we imagined, because perhaps the secret was never hidden in the way we assumed. Consider first the sheer improbability of the silence itself. For nearly 2,000 years, the mysteries initiated tens of thousands of people, farmers and philosophers, slaves and emperors, women and men from every corner of the Mediterranean world. That is roughly 60 generations of human beings, each one carrying the secret to the grave. 60 generations. Think about how hard it is to keep a secret in a single family, in a single lifetime. And yet across 16 centuries, no initiate ever wrote down what happened inside the telesterion. No deathbed confession survives. No betrayal detailed the vision. Aeschylus was nearly killed on suspicion of hinting at it in a play. Alcibiades was condemned merely for mocking it at a dinner party. The oath was not a formality, it was a wall, and the wall held. When historians say this may be the best-kept secret in human history, they are not exaggerating. They are simply describing a silence so vast it has no rival. And then there is what time itself took from us. There was never a complete written record. The rite was transmitted by the priestly families of Eleusis, mouth to ear, hand to hand, for centuries. When the sanctuary was destroyed at the end of the 4th century, when the last hierophant died without a successor, that living chain simply snapped. Whatever documents, hymns, or instructions may have existed were scattered or burned in the long wars and slow ruin that followed the fall of the classical world. What archaeology gives us today is a floor plan and fragments the outline of a room, the base of the hierophant's throne, votive offerings, broken relief carvings of Demeter handing grain to a kneeling boy. The stage survives, the play is gone. But there is a deeper reason still, and this, I think, is where the truth of Eleusis actually lives. Perhaps the secret was never fully written down, because it could not be written down. Every hint the ancient witnesses left behind points in the same direction, not toward a hidden object or a forbidden doctrine, but toward an experience that overwhelmed the very machinery of language. Aristotle, who catalogued the entire knowable world, said the initiates did not go to Eleusis to learn something, but to undergo something, to suffer it, to be changed by it. Think about what that means. The greatest classifying mind of antiquity, faced with the mysteries, set down his pen and admitted, "This is not information. This is transformation. And a transformation cannot be leaked. It cannot be stolen, sold, whispered, or written on a scroll. It can only be lived one soul at a time, one night at a time, in the flickering dark of the telesterion." Perhaps that is the true answer to the riddle we opened with. Why did tens of thousands of people keep the secret until their dying breath? Maybe not only because they feared the penalty or honored the oath, but because there was, in the deepest sense, nothing they could tell. How do you describe the moment your fear of death dissolved? How do you put into words the instant the great doors swung open and light poured over you and something inside you, some old cold knot of dread, simply came undone? Cicero didn't describe the vision, he described its result. We have learned to live with joy and to die with better hope. That is not a report. That is a testimony. The secret of Eleusis was never a sentence to be spoken. It was a threshold to be crossed, and a threshold keeps its own counsel. So here we stand, more than 2,000 years later, and the astonishing thing is, not that Eleusis fell silent, but that it never truly stopped speaking. Its spirit runs like an underground river beneath the whole of Western civilization. It flows through Plato's cave, where prisoners turn from shadows toward the blinding light of the real. It flows through the Neoplatonists and the Hermetic sages, through the Gnostics who spoke of awakening from the sleep of the world. It surfaces in the depth psychology of Carl Jung, who saw in Demeter and Persephone the eternal drama of the human soul, the descent into darkness, the confrontation with loss, the return carrying something no one can take from you. It glimmers in our literature and our films, in every story where a hero must go down into the underworld before they can come home changed. Every rite of passage, every dark night of the soul, every quiet moment when a person faces their own mortality and finds unexpectedly, not terror, but peace, all of it echoes the torchlit road to Eleusis, and the ruins themselves still stand. If you go there today, a quiet town northwest of Athens, the sea glinting in the distance, you can walk on the same stones the initiates walked. You can stand in the rectangular outline of the telesterion, open now to the sky, and feel the strange hush that settles over the place. The columns are broken. The throne of the Hierophant is an empty base. The cave they called the gateway to the underworld still yawns in the hillside. The sanctuary is silent, but it is not an empty silence. It is a keeping silence. 2,000 years after the last torch went out, Eleusis is still holding its promise. There is something almost unbearably moving about that. A place that has kept faith with the dead longer than any empire has kept faith with the living. And perhaps this is the great lesson, the one thing the mysteries were always trying to teach, the one thing that survived when everything else was lost. It was never really about a ritual. It was never about a drink, or a relic, or a secret word. It was a reminder, passed hand to hand across 60 generations, that a human being only truly changes when they dare to walk into the darkness of their own depths, not around it, not away from it, into it. Persephone did not choose her descent, but the descent became the source of her power, the reason the seasons turn, the reason the seed dies in the ground and rises again as grain. The initiates walked the sacred way in the dark because they understood something we spend our whole lives avoiding. That the descent is not an ending, it is the beginning of return. Every winter carries spring inside it, every ending is pregnant with a beginning, and the fear of death, faced honestly, in the dark, with open eyes becomes, somehow, the doorway to a deeper way of being alive. That is what they saw at Eleusis. Or perhaps that is what they became. So now the question passes to you, as it passed to every pilgrim who ever stood at the edge of the sacred way, torch in hand, heart pounding, staring down the road into the dark. What do you believe? Were the Eleusinian Mysteries merely an ancient Greek religious rite, a beautiful, elaborate ceremony belonging to a vanished world? Or were they a doorway, a genuine doorway to a profound knowledge of life, death, and the journey of the soul, a knowledge that humanity glimpsed once, guarded fiercely, and has never truly decoded since? Share your thoughts below, because this is a question no historian can settle for you. Like the mysteries themselves, it can only be answered from within. The torches of Eleusis went dark 16 centuries ago, but the question they illuminated still burns in every one of us. What waits beyond the final door, and who might we become if we dared to open